The morning of December 26, 1862, was cold and silent. Snow blanketed the streets of Mankato, Minnesota. The river ran sluggish and black, half frozen beneath a pale winter sun. Thousands of people lined the roads, bundled in wool and furs, boots crunching against ice. They had come not to celebrate a holiday, but to witness a death. 38 deaths. A massive wooden scaffold had been erected in the center of town. It towered above the crowd, a gallows unlike any the frontier had seen. It creaked in the breeze, cords taut, traps set. Soldiers guarded the perimeter, rifles in hand, while ministers whispered final prayers into the ears of the condemned. And inside a fenced pen, below the structure, 38 Dakota men waited. They wore blankets over their shoulders, many barefoot in the snow. Some stood tall, others knelt in silence. A few sang in their language, voices rising like smoke against the gray sky. Then, as the noon bell tolled, they were led one by one onto the platform. No blindfolds, no hesitation, just the crack of the trapdoor, and the largest mass execution in United States history. To understand how it happened, how 38 men came to be hanged on a single December day, you have to understand the story behind the gallows. A story of treaties broken, land stolen, hunger, desperation, and rage. And a war that lasted only 6 weeks, but changed everything. The Dakota people had lived in the Minnesota River Valley for centuries. Long before settlers arrived, long before surveyors drew maps, they moved with the seasons, hunting buffalo, fishing the rivers, planting corn and squash. But by the mid-1800s, everything was changing. White settlers poured into Minnesota, encouraged by the U.S. government. The Dakota were pressured into signing land treaties, first in 1837, then in 1851, giving up vast swaths of their homeland in exchange for annuities, yearly payments of money, food, and goods. The promises were simple on paper, but in practice, they meant dependence. And when the government delayed those payments, or diverted them entirely into the pockets of corrupt agents and traders, the Dakota starved. By 1862, years of broken treaties had pushed the Dakota to the brink. The hunting grounds were gone. Their reservation lands were too small to sustain life. Crops failed. Game disappeared. And when they begged for food, Indian agents told them, "Let them eat grass." Then the Civil War began, and Washington forgot them entirely. That summer, the Dakota held council. Some leaders, like Tawyadaduta, better known as Little Crow, tried to keep the peace, but the people were desperate. On August 17th, 4 young Dakota men, angry and starving, killed 5 white settlers near Acton Township. It was a spark. Within days, war broke out. Little Crow, once reluctant, now led a full-scale uprising against the settlers and the U.S. military. The Dakota attacked New Ulm and other river towns. Forts were besieged. Dozens of homesteads were burned. Hundreds died, both white settlers and Dakota alike. The violence was swift, brutal, and deeply personal. Families were torn apart. Entire communities vanished in flames. It lasted 6 weeks. And when it ended, the Dakota were defeated. Surrender didn't bring peace. It brought vengeance. The U.S. military responded with overwhelming force. General Henry Sibley led troops into the valley, capturing over 1,500 Dakota people, men, women, and children. They were herded into camps, their fates left to military tribunals. The trials were a sham. Over 400 Dakota men were charged with murder, rape, or acts of war. The court-martial proceedings were rushed, sometimes lasting less than 5 minutes. Defendants had no lawyers, no translators. Many couldn't understand the charges against them. The goal wasn't justice, it was punishment. And in the end, 303 men were sentenced to death. The public called for blood. Minnesota newspapers demanded swift execution. Settlers screamed for revenge. Politicians fanned the flames, but the final decision belonged to one man: President Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln, in the middle of the Civil War, received word of the 303 death sentences in November 1862. He didn't take it lightly. The political pressure to approve all executions was enormous, especially with midterm elections looming and Minnesota's support critical to the Union. But Lincoln hesitated. He asked to review the trial transcripts himself. For weeks, he pored over the records, looking for legal grounds to intervene. In the end, he commuted the sentences of 265 men, authorizing execution only for those convicted of rape or the most egregious killings of civilians. It was a compromise, a moral one, a political one, and for some, a deeply painful one. Minnesotans were outraged that Lincoln had spared so many. His approval rating in the state plummeted. There were calls for lynchings, for vigilante justice. But Lincoln stood firm, and he gave the order. 38 men were to be executed, the largest mass execution in American history. They were hanged at once. No staggered sentences, no private gallows, just one massive public execution in the town square of Mankato. The platform was built to hold them all. A stage of death, 6 feet above the frozen earth. When the signal was given, a single lever dropped all the trapdoors at once. Eyewitnesses said the sound was like a gunshot. The ropes swung in unison. Some said the men had sung as they died, a Dakota hymn. After the hanging, soldiers cut the bodies down and buried them in a shallow mass grave nearby. But even that wasn't the end. That night, a mob of doctors and townspeople exhumed the corpses. Several bodies were taken. One, the body of a man named Mahpia Inajing, he who stands in clouds, was sent to a doctor who preserved his skeleton and displayed it for years. It wouldn't be returned to his descendants until 1998. The remaining Dakota were exiled from Minnesota. The U.S. Congress abolished their reservations. Survivors, including women and children, were forced aboard riverboats and shipped to prison camps in Iowa and South Dakota. Dozens died of cold and disease along the way. Minnesota declared itself cleansed of the Dakota. Their land was seized, their names erased from maps, and the gallows in Mankato were torn down, replaced by shops and streets, as if nothing had happened. But the memory remained. Among the Dakota, the story of the 38 was never forgotten. It was passed down through generations, whispered in winter lodges, sung in ceremonies, honored in silence. And in 2005, the Dakota 38+2 Memorial Ride began, a long, cold horseback journey retracing the path to Mankato, held every December in remembrance. The +2 refers to 2 more Dakota men executed later, one in 1865, another in 1866, after being captured in Canada. 40 lives taken, hundreds exiled, thousands scarred. What happened in 1862 wasn't just a war, it was the unraveling of a people, the breaking of treaties, the hunger that turned to fury, the fury that turned to fire, and the fire that was met with a gallows. Today, Mankato bears little resemblance to the town that watched those 38 men die. There are no ropes swinging in the square, no soldiers with rifles, just traffic lights and storefronts. A plaque, maybe. But every December, when the snow starts to fall, the riders come. They ride not for revenge, but for memory. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more true stories from the old frontier.